That's the year that was, and it was quite a big one, particularly here in Africa. Thank you so much for joining us, Sophie. And you've travelled the continent quite a bit, a lot of key events that took place. But I want to start with this young lady here who, you know, it started off as an Eastern Cape story, then became a South African story, and now it's a universe story. Yes, really remarkable.
Indeed, she did very well, and it looks like she's doing very well, and she's coping in the US. Currently, she's still in the US. She is expected to visit South Africa in a new year, and perhaps we'll get a glimpse of her after she has won Miss Universe. But what's good is that she made an announcement this week that she is going to give funding or avail funds for almost 20 young female students at Sophie University in the Northern Cape. A good move, because that university is in a very poor area. It's one of the new universities, and they really need support. And I think her taking a decision to assist students at Sophie is indeed a good move. I mean, she is such a simple person, and she does maintain what she believes in, you know, being herself, and also speaking on behalf of those who are vulnerable, particularly young female, and particularly those who are abused. And her reign will revolve around issues of
beautiful
abuse.
Story. So a little bit later on, we took a look at Russia, China, Britain, and their involvement, particularly on the continent. I mean, we saw the first Russia-Africa summit, and it's almost as if this new scramble for Africa is taking place. Take us through that, and also some of the highlights of Africa for us.
Clearly, it looks like there's a scramble for Africa, but also people have warned that this should not lead to the partition of Africa. If you've done history, that is the European history, that's what we did in South Africa. You'll see that when you look at the African history, it speaks to partition of Africa, where the continent was divided into different countries by our colonizers in terms of boundaries, when they were giving themselves and enriching themselves with the wealth of the continent. And the hope is that this time around we'll have wise leaders who will ensure that whatever relations we enter into or agreements we enter into, particularly on trade and investment, benefit the ordinary Africans on the continent. So you saw the US-Africa Summit, the China-Africa Summit, the Japan-Africa Summit, Russia-Africa Summit. In January next year, towards February, you will see another summit, that is UK-Africa Summit. You know that after Brexit, UK will have to create more relationships in terms of bilateral trade, and therefore they are thinking of working with Africa as a bloc. So indeed, there is a scramble for Africa, and I hope our leaders are up to the task to ensure that it's not about them, but about ordinary Africans, and us Africans in media and young people in particular. We must be vigilant.
All right, talking about leaders, 2019 saw a number of long-time leaders leave us, some through death and some actually imprisoned. It was quite remarkable, and perhaps this is looking to a new era of African politics and African leadership.
Yes, you look at countries such as Sudan. We know that Omar al-Bashir is facing many charges recently, who are sentenced to 2 years in prison based on what he did as head of state, but there are more charges coming up. And also you'd recall that there's still a pending charge sheet with the International Criminal Court, where he's been accused of violation of human rights in that country. And it's not clear yet whether the current interim government will send him to The Hague, which I don't think it will happen. I suspect because you have a situation where the military is still in charge. You do have few people who are part of that interim structure. That is why ordinary Sudanese are not happy. And I think because they are a product of al-Bashir, they'll go all out to protect him. They won't send him to The Hague. And then you have Algeria, Bouteflika out of power. You come to the southern region, former President Robert Mugabe, no more. You know, indeed, it's a new era. But the question is, Peter, for me, the new guys, is there anything different that you have observed? Let's start with Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
I mean, people are complaining now. The situation is worse.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit like just shuffling chairs more than anything else. But what is interesting, in the three countries that you mentioned before, there was a lot of protests led by young people in Algeria, in Sudan, and I just wonder if perhaps the old guard that's still in power, we look at Uganda, and we start to question, could it be that there's 22 elections lined up for next year, but could there be pressure from young people for change on the continent?
Young people are really pushing hard to ensure that it's not business as usual. But you know the problem with elections on the continent. You have a situation where the electoral bodies on the continent are not credible. Therefore, you are not guaranteed of the credible, fair outcome. And much as the young people and the women in particular are pushing hard that we have a better Africa, and it's not business as usual. It's very difficult in some countries. I mean, Burundi is going to elections, Ghana is going to elections, and Ethiopia. So we'll see. Cameroon, there are many African countries, but for me of interest is Burundi, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Cameroon. But the question is, are we going to see credible, free and fair elections? But the young people on the continent are up in arms. They are not employed.
We've run out of time, but I can't leave you without asking President Ramaphosa, the AU chair next year, what kind of leadership is required for the continent next year?
Well, the target of silencing the guns in 2020, are we going to reach that? I think his responsibility is to ensure that we meet that target of 2020 of silencing the guns, but also to ensure that the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is a reality. And I think he has a lot of work to do, but also, you know, we have Commonwealth Conference coming in Rwanda this year. Therefore, plus elections, it's quite a hectic year next year.
So you've got to get your passport ready.
We'll try. We'll try.
All right, Sophie, thanks so much indeed for joining us. That's our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, talking to us about some of the issues of 2019 and lots to look forward to in 2020 as well. Now, the SABC says it's all its radio stations